I wanted to refresh everybody what we used to do, right? And if you want to see what we've been doing for the last 500 days, we've been analyzing a property essentially almost once every single day for, I know I did it for 365 days in a row, and then I mixed in a little other topics, right? So today I'm in a Birmingham market and I got a property out here in Fairfield. So that's why I'm talking about this. And what I want to do here is I want to highlight for you how I build out a comparable sales list and also analyze the property on the market to see whether or not it's going to cash flow for Section 8 purposes. And this is especially important to get and track what's coming onto the market because if you're pursuing the BRRRR strategy, right? The BRRRR strategy, what does it stand for? It stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat. If you're going for that strategy, then obviously the most critical factor you want for that strategy is what's your ARV? What's your after repair value? And in order for you to get the after repair value, you have to be paying very, very close attention to what's happening in the market, right? Why? Why is that? So yesterday or 2 days ago, we talked a lot about the 10-year yield. And you've been following what's happening to the 10-year yield. Let me just put in the Finance Yahoo one for you. The 10-year yield has been swinging like crazy. Just look at this. All right, it's back up to 4.49. If you've been tracking for the last year, right? We went from a highs of 4.7 a year ago to a low of 3.67 and back up to 4.8. Then it dipped as low as literally just a couple of days ago to 3.8, and now it's back up to 4.5. That is a lot of fluctuation, right? And the relationship between the 10-year yield and the interest rates, 30-year mortgage interest rates, is, I mean, there's two things that drives it, right? There's two things that drives the interest rate for the 30-year mortgage. It's the interest rate of the 10-year yield itself, which sits at 4.493 today, and the spread between the 10-year yield and the 30-year mortgage interest rate. Historically, that spread has been about 1.5 to 2%, but we've seen as high as 3%, which is what we're at now. So as you think about it, right, if interest rates are going up, it drives up your payments. It puts it makes it less affordable, so it puts downward pressure on the prices of homes. The other way, right? If interest rates go down, then your payment goes down. So now it's more affordable. That drives affordability up and it drives up prices. But here's where it gets crazy, right? With this much fluctuations going on, right? Let's say you buy a property today for, um, let's say you buy a property today for $50,000, 50, and you spend $20,000 on a rehab. So you're all in at $70,000. If you're able to use a 20 grand rehab and make that property worth 100 grand, right? So you force $30,000 equity, that allows you to go get a DSCR, a debt service coverage ratio loan for 70% of the home's value pretty easily. So now you can take back out 70 grand because that home's worth 100 grand in the form of a loan. It's tax free. And now you take the same proceeds, right? And just roll it towards the next deal and do it over and over and over again. That's why the BRRRR strategy is so popular because it allows you to scale a lot faster. Because what's the alternative? Right? The alternative is you save up money for a 20% down payment, you hope that property that you buy either appreciates or cash flows, and you save up money again, all over again for your next 20 or 25% down payment. Not saying you can't be successful doing that, but it is going to be slower. There are tons of people that have been very successful doing exactly that. But to each their own, right? You got to figure out what your strategy is, but you got to also understand what your weaknesses is. So if you've been following what we've been doing, right? We've been adding all these properties by zip code, by bedroom count to our property list. And we've been tracking all the properties that have been sold in the last 12 months, 3 months, and now we're tracking properties that are coming onto the market specifically for the reason that I just told you just now. Because we need to figure out what's going on in the market. Because if you're using comps from just even a week ago, right? Just even a week ago, that could be wrong because the interest rates have been fluctuating like crazy. So you got to be very careful, right? So obviously, I track your typical stats, right? Bed bath count, the square footage, the year built. This property was last built in 1950. Sold price, I'm gonna write that's listed for 165, 165,000. So that means on a dollar per square foot perspective, 165 to buy 1160 is trying to be sold for 142. That's really high. Wow. That would break some records right here. Listed 1 day ago. So 411. The acreage is 8712 for the lot size, 8712. Is there a garage on this property? No garage. Decent sized lot, well maintained, modern. Okay. No, no basement, no HOA. This property is in a neighborhood called, I'm just going to zoom out really fast. So I just took this and I zoom out. This is right in midfield. So I'll write midfield right here. Uh, Very modern, newly rehabbed, no work needed at all for bathrooms, kitchen, flooring, or painting. So now this tells me right away what I can expect for this property in terms of rehab. And this, in my opinion, it would be your best case scenario if this property sold for 142 a square foot. So I'm paying attention to this because if this property does sell for 142 a square foot, then now next time I get another cash property in 35228 and I'm thinking about the burst strategy, I'm gonna go back to this list and see what's happening in this area to see what has been sold. Okay. Because this property, let's look at this one in midfield, a little bit further away. Did it sell yet? No, it's still on the market. But now it's 139, right? This property was listed for 168 and now it's 139. So it dropped by 30 grand and still no one has bought it. So let's see what's going on with this property. Okay. That means there's no way this property is going to sell for 165. This property right here, I mean, granted, it's street by street in Birmingham. So be very mindful, be very careful about where you're buying. But hey, let's at least now go and analyze this property because now I'm figuring out what's happening to this market, right? Okay. Listed at 113 for $168,000. Drop to 139,000 on when did it drop to 139? So this is why I track it, right? This is why I track it. And April 3rd. So they've been vacant for almost 3 months. So they're taking either a big loss on this property or something's going on and they're not able to sell. And I don't know why. 139, April 3rd. 4, 3, 25. All right. 139. So now it's being listed for $82 a square foot. So realistically, I don't think this property is going to sell for 142. But take my bet on it and check up on it in like 2 months. All right. But now I at least know what's happening in the market. Okay. And in January, if you followed what happened, right? In January, you saw no wonder it didn't sell, right? Because that peaked. The 10-year yield peaked. So it made prices way less affordable. Versus if you bought it maybe 3 days ago, then maybe it would be a little different. Okay. Very different, right? This is why you got to pay attention to the 10-year yield and not the headlines that you're seeing out there. Okay. All right. So now, let me see. I want to make sure that if there's any chats, I can pay attention to it. Great. So, all right. Now let's analyze this deal. Let's plug in some numbers here. This property is 9 year in rehab. Listing price $165,000. The rehab, let me delete this multiplied by 3 right here because that's for a different scenario. And I'm going to go to my rehab calculator. I'm going to set aside $1,500 for the roof just in case there's any issues here in row 6. I'm going to go to row 46, put in $500 to keep the landscaping nice and tidy until I get it rented out. I don't need to paint anything, so I'm going to zero out this property, zero the square footage, in G86. No flooring work. For my 2 toilets, I always replace them with high pressure flush toilets because I never want to get a clogged toilet call because when I do, it essentially kills my entire cash flow for the month, and I don't really like that. So not doing that. Then I am going to put in cage. I forgot to put it in there. Cage for HVAC. HVAC cage. Because I've had a HVAC stolen from me before, and I'm not gonna let that happen again. Okay. So $900 for the HVAC cage to make sure it doesn't happen again. Instead of spending 5, 8 grand just to replace it. So that gives me total rehab of 4560 with a 20% contingency. Great. That flows right into B6. Now, for my rent, you guys go two places. The first thing you want to do is you want to Google HUD FMR, HUD space FMR. Click on the first link, go to access to small area FMRs, look up FY 2025 small area FMRs. Select your state, this is proper in your county, this property is in Jefferson County. And now you can see by bedroom count, by zip code, what your rent ceiling is 35228. All right. You can see right here that your rent ceiling is 1630. 1630. And then the 3 bedroom is 1440. All right. 4 bed, 228. Writing down all these details so that, and my partners don't high analyze deals, so this makes life a lot easier when they go and check my research. Now that's the first data point. Then I gotta go get a second data point, and I have to go to affordablehousing.com. I go to the owner section. I go to market rent estimator. I'm gonna plug in the address. I'm gonna plug in a bedroom count, and I'm gonna see right here that the average rent for 5 units, usually it's 25 units, but maybe they don't have enough rentals here, is 1292. Okay. Now pay attention to this. I'm gonna check that again tomorrow because usually they give me 25 units. Kind of weird they only give me 5 units, but hey, take it for now. 1292, and this is for 5 units, 3 mile radius. Okay. The zip is 1453. The city is 1457. And the county is 1918 for 4 bedrooms. Now, as of right now, right, this SAFMR, the 1630, usually includes utilities. So typically, if you don't provide utilities to your tenants, you have to back out the utility allowance from your rent ceiling, which is 1630. In this case, my maximum rent is going to be 1292 anyways, because that is the more reasonable rent. Now you might be asking, okay, why? What does a reasonable rent mean? Let me show you some numbers and some details. If you look up HCV guidebook, right, the Housing Choice Voucher Program guidebook, Housing Choice Vouchers is what was previously known as the Section 8 program. They rebranded from Section 8 to Housing Choice Vouchers because of all the negative connotations that was associated with Section 8. So when you come to this program guide and go to section 2.2, it's going to say that in conducting rent reasonableness, the PHA, or the Public Housing Authority, must determine whether the rent to the owner is a reasonable rent in comparison to rent for other comparable unassisted units. So this means you can't charge more than what the market is renting out for, simply because you're renting out to a Section 8 or a voucher holder. Very important. They're not going to let you take advantage of them. Now, can that be an exception sometimes? Yeah, I've heard of some public housing authorities that do this, but that's the exception and generally not the rule. That's why you listen to my podcast, right? On Affordable Housing Podcast, I brought on folks that talk about what markets do they sometimes pay a little bit more over. But when I underwrite, I will never underwrite like that. I will never underwrite using a higher rent than what the rent ceiling is, unless you know you have insider information. All right. So obviously, the size and unit type matters, but you don't typically see 4 bedroom apartments being built. So I'm very confident that these 4 bedroom properties in this 3 mile radius are single family homes. So I'm pretty confident this 1292 is it. And since it's the lower of the two, it's the more reasonable rent. That's why we're using it in 1292 as my rent. All right. So now let's get our other numbers here. So if I go to my payment calculator, I can see my taxes estimate is 28. That seems really low to be honest with you, but I'll leave it there for now. And then I got 128 for my homeowner insurance. Now I'm going to do equals 128 times 1.2. And I'm multiplying by 1.2 because I'm assuming it's going to add a 20% premium to my insurance if I'm using it as a rental property. Because I'm assuming that this 128 is assuming someone's living there as a primary residence. And this is not the case. So insurance companies typically view investment assets as a higher risk. So they're going to charge a higher premium. So be very mindful of that. All right. Next up, we have 10% set aside for rents. Set 10% of the rent set aside for maintenance, capital expenditures every single month. Because you know that the roof is going to get replaced in 10, 15, 20 years. Right? It doesn't matter how nice this home looks, there's always going to be maintenance. Right? I had an HVAC that got stolen. I just had a $15,000 bill to replace a roof on one of my properties in just 3 years of ownership. So if you don't take this seriously and set aside money right now for those future expenditures that you know are coming your way, you will be underestimating your expenses and overestimating your profitability because you would be thinking, I'm making all this extra money, when in reality, you're not. Because those are real expenses that was going to come your way sooner or later. So don't lie to yourself. Don't be that person. And don't believe anybody that ever tells you that there's no maintenance. That oh, it's a turnkey property. There's no maintenance. That's such garbage. Do not listen to those people that would ever tell you anything like that. All right. Then you got 10% set aside for your property management expenses. And then you got 5% set aside for your vacancy expenses. Right. Obviously, with vacancy expenses, your property is going to be empty at some point, right? People always move out eventually for one reason or not, whether it's death, whether they just have different life circumstances. So make sure you put something in there because you're not going to be 100% occupied all the time. For my down payment in F19, I got 25%. So my down payment is going to be equals to my B4, which is my asking price, multiplied by my down payment percentage of 25%. So I have 41,250 for my renovations, and I got 2.5% for closing costs, 0.025 times my B4, which is my asking price. So I got $4,000 of closing costs. Great. So my finance amount is going to equal to my B4, my asking price, minus my down payment. So I'll be financing 123 grand. Right now, it's probably closer to 7.5% interest rate. And with that said, if I rent this property out as a 3-bedroom property, I mean 4-bedroom property, and I'm able to get 1292 because that's a reasonable rent, I would be losing 77 I'll just do 70 negative $78 to round every single month as a negative 1.9% return. So I bought this property for 165,000 with the $4,600 rehab, 25% down, and 7.5% interest rate. So let's do a couple things, right? How do you know how it would become a deal, right? Let's say assuming everything else stays constant and my target return is 10%. Now, again, this is not investment advice. I'm not soliciting any investments on this call. I'm simply showing you all how to mess with the numbers so that you can determine whether or not it's a deal for you specifically. So B4, 120 grand, 100 grand, great. So if my target return is 9 point instead of 10%, right? This essentially rounds from 10. I'll have to buy the same property for 100 grand, $65,000 less just to make it a deal. Just to make it a deal. Now, is that reasonable to expect someone to sell it for you like that when they listed it for 165? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not. But still, now at least you know what the number is, right? For the criteria. I'll do a couple more scenarios. So let's say you're following the 10-year yield, right? And they're able to get the 10-year yield down because then they stop all this talk of trade wars, blah, blah, blah. The economy stabilizes. So now you lower your interest rate from 7.5 to 6%. See what happened to the cash and cash return in E9? It jumped up. So now 12.64%. Maybe I can be willing to pay 110 grand. Yeah. So just because my interest rates dropped by 1.5 points from 7.5 to 6, I can afford to pay 110 grand for this property, assuming everything else stays constant with 1292 rent. I can cash for 293 a month. That's a 10% return. And that's how you mess with the numbers to figure out what is the deal for you, right? I'll do one more. Let's say all of a sudden this property looks great on the outside, but you realize when you stepped into the home that they did a shoddy job renovating the home, right? The floors are not even, the HVAC is not working, blah, 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 blah. And now you triple your rehab. So you go to B6 and you multiply by three. And now all of a sudden your cash and cash return drop to 8%. So don't freak out, right? Now all of a sudden, even with a 6% interest rate, you want to say, hey, I got to go back to 100 grand because my rehab just tripled to 13,700. And that's how you keep emotions out of the analysis process and figure out what is a deal for you still. Or you walk away, right? You determine what your criteria is, where your cutoff point is, and you go from there. And that's it. So hopefully this was helpful, everybody. My goal with this is for you to analyze a deal every single day so that you can put into practice and start your own YouTube channel. Because my goal is that you use the same spreadsheet I use today. Just go to affordablehousing.io if you want to copy the spreadsheet. Go to the Get Deal Analysis tool, plug in your name, your email, your phone number. That's the fastest way to get a copy of the spreadsheet. I didn't make it from scratch. I got it from a few other folks. I modified, I tweaked it so that I can analyze deals as fast as possible. And obviously, things like the construction budget is going to be different for every single market, but you can start noting down what it costs in your market, especially on a price per square foot to paint. Very, very common. Or flooring, very, very common cosmetic rehab. And you can go from there, right? Because at some point, someone's going to ask you, hey, why do you think this is a deal? And you can say, hey, I know that this is a deal because I've been analyzing properties for the past 500 plus days in a row. Might that give you some confidence that you know what you're doing? I certainly hope so. All right. I haven't analyzed the deal for quite a while in these lives. Hopefully, this was helpful. Leave a comment down below if you thought this was helpful, if we should do more of these, or if you prefer us to go back to some of the content talking about development, talking about how to explain real estate concepts in a simplified manner. So let me know. Happy to do it. Let's keep it up. Let's stay consistent. And I hope you all have an amazing Saturday. Hope you all spend some quality time with your family and friends today. That's what life is all about. All right. I had fun today. I'll see you all tomorrow for day 5, 6, 2. Have a good one, everybody.